صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة، ويا عبرة كل مؤمن ومؤمنة. يا ليتنا فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. عطروا أفواهكم وزينوا مجالسكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Respected scholars, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam departed the city of Medina, he articulated very clearly his mission statement to remove any ambiguity about why he was rising up against the Umayyads. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, from the beginning, he expressed to all Muslims why he is rising up when he said, وَإِنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشِرًا وَلَا بَطِرًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he presents his mission statement to the Muslim world. A Muslim world that had devolved into deep ignorance. You have an ummah during the time of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam who was practicing Islam, but their adherence to Islam was a very superficial one, where you have individuals who pray, they fast, they recite the Quran, but they did not really internalize the values of Islam. And this is precisely why, or one of the reasons why, when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was in Mecca, he departs Mecca on Yawm al-Tarwiyah. He leaves Mecca on the day before the day of Arafah, which is the climax, which is the pinnacle of Hajj. And it's as though Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was conveying to the Muslim ummah that what value does Hajj have when you pay allegiance to someone like Yazid? What kind of Hajj is this? What kind of Islam is this? An Islam where you bow your head to the likes of Yazid and you acknowledge him as Amir al-Mu'mineen while you perform Hajj? What happened to the Tawheed of Ibrahim? What happened to the Islam of Rasulullah? What happened to the Islam of the Commander of the Faithful? An Islam that is uncompromising when it comes to injustice. Now, we all know what happened in the Battle of Karbala in the 61st year after the Hijrah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his noble companions, his beloved family members, they were massacred. Now, it's important for us to understand that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. it's important for us to understand that the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, which is the mission of Islah, was continued by Imam al-Sajjad. The movement had to continue after Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. The job wasn't done. The ummah needs to be guided and directed after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein. Now today, 14 centuries later, it's very obvious to us who was victorious in the Battle of Karbala. We have the luxury of hindsight. After 14 centuries, it is clear that Hussein was victorious and Yazid was vanquished. Especially when you look at the majalis around the world, you look at Ziyaratul Arba'een, there's no doubt that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam accomplished what he had set out to accomplish. And this is why when Imam Zainul Abidin was in Sham, he was approached by a man who was sympathetic towards the Umayyads. And he said to him, Ya Ali ibn al-Hussein, man ghalab? This was in the immediate aftermath of Ashura. He asked him, O Ali, son of Hussein, who was victorious? Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, the narration says that his head was covered and he was in the mahmad, he was in the caravan. And the Imam gave him a brilliant answer. He says, إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَعْرِفَ مَنْ غَلَبْ, if you want to know who was victorious, when the time of salah begins, فَأَذِّن ثُمَّ أَقِمْ. If you want to know who was victorious, Hussein or Yazid, when the time of salah begins, recite the adhan and the iqamah. Whose name is mentioned after La ilaha illallah? Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Allahumma salli. Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, he says Imam al-Hussein was victorious. Because Imam al-Hussein, he gave his blood, so this name remains. The Umayyads wanted to eradicate the memory of Rasulullah. And it was Imam al-Hussein. You know, when we speak about the la'an on the pulpits, only Allah knows what would have happened if that continued. Yes, today Ali and Fatima, and they're being condemned. But as the years pass, eventually the Umayyads would convince the masses that even Muhammad was an imposter. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he preserved the memory of the Prophet. He preserved the pure, unadulterated Islam that was propagated by the Prophet. Now, if you look at the psyche of the Shia community in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of Ashura, you find that it was not obvious to the Shias that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was victorious. In fact, the Shia community by and large was completely demoralized after the Shahada of Imam al-Hussein. Because what do they see on the ground? If you just look at the facts on the ground, the facts on the ground is what? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was militarily defeated. He was martyred. Imam al-Hussein was unable to overthrow the Umayyads. The most noble companions, the elite of the Shia, were decimated. And Yazid is still in power, and the Umayyads are still strong. So you can only imagine the despair and the despondency that was felt by the Shias. Now in this environment, Imam al-Sajjad has to strike a very delicate balance. And that delicate balance is what? I can't let anyone forget what happened to Hussein, but I have to also ensure that I lift up the spirits of the Shia. That's not easy to do. We have a narration from Imam Al-Ridha salawatullahi alayhi. Just to give you a sense of the gravity of the loss that the Shi'as had experienced with the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam, he says to Ibn Shabib, Al-Rayyan ibn Shabib, he says to him, among the things that he mentions is, وَقُتِلَ مَعَهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِهِ ثمانية عشر رجلا ما لهم في الأرض شبيه. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam, he says, there were 18 members of Imam al-Hussein's family who were martyred alongside him. And Imam al-Ridha, he says, these 18 from the Bani Hashim, the likes of Al-Abbas, Ali al-Akbar, Al-Qasim, and you take the number to 18. Imam al-Ridha says, these 18 people, there was no one on the face of the earth that was like them. Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam is saying that the Shi'as had lost individuals who were irreplaceable. When you lose someone like Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, you think you can replace someone like that? You think you can replace someone who is أشبه الناس خلقا وخلقا ومنطقا برسولك محمد? How can you replace someone like Ali al-Akbar? How can you replace people like this? So after the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, for lack of a better word, he inherited a mess of a situation. Meaning, there was no one left. He was the only one. In fact, the narrations say, the ashab of Imam Al-Sajjad, after Karbala, were about 3 to 5 individuals. Now you may say, but how about all of the Shia in Kufa? We have to make a distinction between Shias who are politically Shia and Shias who are theological Shias. There were many in Kufa who were Shia in the political sense, meaning their political ambitions happened to align with Ahlul Bayt. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they believed in the isma and the divine designation of the Imams. The Shias, the strong Shias, in the theological sense, were about 3 to 5. And that's it. Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam literally had to rebuild the ummah from the ground up. And he has a huge challenge. When you go back to Medina after Karbala, again, the Umayyads are still in power. From the perspective of the Umayyads, Ali ibn al-Hussein is still a threat. Why? Because at the end of the day, he is still the son of the man who tried to overthrow our government. So naturally, Imam Zainul Abidin is going to be heavily monitored and surveillanced. He begins with 3 to 5 ashab. When he dies, in the 95th year after the Hijrah, Shaykh al-Tusi, rahimahullah, he says Imam al-Sajjad had 173 solid companions. It was these companions that trained and disseminated the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. When we speak about Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq and the hundreds and thousands of students that they had, all of this, the seeds of this intellectual revolution was planted by Ali ibn al-Hussein. And it is a miracle that Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam was able to train these individuals. And these individuals emerge as ulama, and he was able to do it without attracting the attention of the Umayyads. You see, one thing that Shias don't do a very good job of, especially today, Shias don't do a very good job at self-preservation. They confuse recklessness with courage. I'll give you a simple example. Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam, he had a companion by the name of Sa'id ibn Jubayr. Sa'id ibn Jubayr was a companion of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. I want to quote to you a conversation that Sa'id ibn Jubayr has with Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, the murderer of Iraq. Of course, Hajjaj eventually kills Sa'id ibn Jubayr, but this is a conversation that happened many years before his death. Hajjaj, he asks Sa'id, and I want you to compare the way that Sa'id answers these questions to the way that Shias today engage in discussions, especially online, on YouTube and on social media. He asks Sa'id ibn Jubayr, ما تقول في أبي بكر وعمر هما في الجنة أو في النار. Hajjaj, he asks Sa'id ibn Jubayr, one of the elite Sahaba of Imam Al-Sajjad, what is your opinion about Abu Bakr and Umar? Are they in Jannah or are they in Jahannam? Now if you ask this question to, Shia Twitter, what are you going to get? You're going to get the keyboard warriors who think that they're so courageous and I'm going to speak the truth. وَلَا تَأْخُذُنِي فِي اللَّهِ لَوْمَةُ لَائِمٍ. This mentality. But look at Sa'id ibn Jubayr. Look at how Imam Al-Sajjad trains him to deal with fitna. Sa'id says, قال لو دخلت الجنة فنظرت إلى أهلها لعلمت من فيها. Sa'id says, if Allah allows me to enter Jannah, I will look around and I will tell you who's there. You're asking me something that I'm not into. Let me get to Jannah first. Hajjaj, he presses him further. قال فما قولك في الخلفاء. What is your opinion about the khulafa? Now again, if you ask this question to Shia Twitter, what are you going to... We know the answer. He says, قال لست عليهم بوكيل. I'm not responsible for their actions. Allah is their judge. And then he says what? Then Hajjaj asks him again, أيهم أحب إليك? Which one of the khulafa is the most beloved to you, Sa'id? What does he say? قال أرضاهم لخالقه. The one who is most beloved to me is the one who is most beloved to Allah. Is Sa'id ibn Jubayr lying? He's being honest, but he's being wise. He has hikmah, self-preservation. He says the one who is most pleasing to Allah. And then Hajjaj presses him even further. فَأَيُّهُمْ أَرْضَى لِلْخَالِقِ. Which one of them is the most pleasing to Allah among the khulafa? Sa'id ibn Jubayr, he says, عِلْمُ ذَلِكَ عِنْدَ الَّذِي يَعْلَمُ سِرَّهُمْ وَنَجْوَاهُمْ. The one who knows what is inside of them and what is outside of them, he's the one who knows. Meaning, Imam Zaynul Abidin alayhi salam, he trained a generation of scholars who are able to navigate polemical discussions without engaging in unwarranted provocation. This is hikmah. This is the difference between those who are trained by Ali ibn al-Hussein and those who are trained by people who are emotional, who are ignorant. Sa'id ibn Jubayr, this is how he responds. This is not a matter of courage or lack of courage. Because as we will see with Imam Zaynul Abidin alayhi salam, Imam understands that we are a minority living with a majority. And sometimes we have to engage in taqiyya to protect ourselves from harm, but we also have another form of taqiyya, at-taqiyya al-mudaratiyya. Sometimes we have to avoid certain conversations for the sake of peaceful coexistence. We're not saying distort history. We're not saying do not discuss sensitive issues, but there's a time and a place for everything. This is what Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam teach us. Now, I want to share, my dear brothers and sisters, 3 significant uprisings that happened during the era of Imam Al-Sajjad, and I want to share with you how the Imam reacted to these 3 revolutions and these 3 uprisings. And what was the Imam's position? Did the Imam support these uprisings? Did he exclude himself? What was his position regarding the uprisings that took place after he returned to Medina? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first uprising, so we know that the Battle of Karbala took place in 61 AH, 61 after the Hijrah. In the year 63 after the Hijrah, a very important uprising happens in Medina. So this is 2 years after Karbala. And this uprising is known as Waq'atul Harrah, the Harrah uprising. Now Harrah is a geographical term, and it refers specifically to the volcanic rock, the lava rock that surrounded Medina. You see, Medina lies north of Mecca. At that time, of course, things have changed today with the development of highways, and a lot has changed in Mecca and Medina. During the time of the Prophet and the early Imams, the only way to enter Medina is from the northwest, because the east, the west, and the south was covered in this volcanic rock. It was a natural kind of barrier. So there was an uprising that took place. Now, what's the story behind this uprising? The leader of this uprising was a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Hanzala. I'm going to mention a few terms, few names. Don't get confused, because the whole point of this historical discussion is to draw lessons that can help us today. A revolution was started by a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Hanzala. Who's Abdullah ibn Hanzala? He is one of the tabi'een. His father was one of the martyrs in the Battle of Uhud. Hanzala ibn Abi Amr, he was 24 years old. He was newlywed. He married Jamila, the daughter of Abdullah ibn Ubay. He marries her. They consummate the marriage. The Battle of Uhud takes place the following day. The day after he got married, the Battle of Uhud took place. He comes to the battle because it was an emergency situation. They had to defend Medina. He comes to the battlefield in a state of janaba. He didn't have enough time to do ghusl. At that time, people didn't have showers like we did today. So he comes to the battle. So this is the father of this man who is revolting in Medina. Hanzala ibn Abi Amr, he's martyred in the battle. The Prophet is informed that, he consummated his marriage. He didn't have a chance to do ghusl. Rasulullah says, don't worry. He is ghasilul malaika. He didn't have the chance to do ghusl. The angels are doing ghusl for him because he fell as a martyr in Uhud. Abdullah ibn Hanzala was the child that was conceived on the eve of Uhud. He grows up. He has a family. He is one of the most prominent figures in Medinan society. He was not Shia. He was a very morally upright person, and he says to himself that Yazid ordered the killing of Hussein. We Muslims, we gave bay'ah to Yazid. Who is this Yazid that we gave bay'ah to? I want to go to Sham and investigate and meet this man who we are calling Amir al-Mu'mineen. So him and his 10 sons, they go to Sham and they meet with Yazid. They want to see who is the Khalifa now. Who is this person who is now occupying the pulpit of the Prophet? He goes, he meets Yazid, he comes back. And he tells the people of Medina that, O people of Medina, we have given bay'ah to a fasiq, a corrupt, morally depraved person, someone who drinks wine, someone who fornicates, who commits incest, who plays with dogs and this is someone who's the furthest from faith. This is someone who has no association with Islam. So Abdullah ibn Hanzala, because of his reputation and his prominence in Medina, he organizes a revolt against the Umayyads. And they're trying to depose the governor of Medina. Question: what does Imam Al-Sajjad do? Some of us, we think from a political perspective, the enemy of my enemy is always my friend. Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam, yes, he has a common enemy, but what does he do? He completely excludes himself from this uprising. And in fact, he tells his followers, those who would listen to him, that do not join this revolt. In fact, Imam Zainul Abidin actually left Medina during this revolt. And Imam Al-Sajjad sends a letter to Yazid saying that I have nothing to do with this revolution. Now imagine some of us who are living in Medina. We would say to the Imam, some of us think that we should give the Imam advice. Ya ibn Rasulullah, Yazid, these are mu'mineen, they're revolting against this zalim. Why are you not supporting them? Where are the hashtags of support? Right? Imam Al-Sajjad removes himself. Why? Because Ahlul Bayt teach us that it's not just about who you don't support and what you don't stand for. It's also about what you do stand for. Just because you oppose the Umayyads, it doesn't mean that you're going to elect someone or appoint someone who's going to be pious and good. They simply might just replace one zalim for another. Now what does Yazid do? Yazid sends an army to Medina, headed by Muslim ibn Uqba. 5,000 soldiers descend upon Medina. The instructions that Yazid gives are the following. And it's very disturbing what Yazid says to Muslim ibn Uqba. He says, "Ud'u al-qawma thalathan." Give the people of Medina. Again, who's in Medina? You have Sahaba, you have Tabi'een. Imam Al-Sajjad has left. He's in the outskirts of Medina. Muslim ibn Uqba is told by Yazid, invite them to surrender. Give them 3 days. If they insist on their rebellion, فَإِنْهُمْ أَجَابُوكَ وَإِلَّا فَقَاتِلْهُمْ. Fight against them if they refuse to surrender. فَإِذَا أُظْهِرْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ فَأَبِحَّا ثَلَاثًا. Fight them, and if you are victorious, Yazid says, I make Medina halal for you. Meaning what? فَمَا فِيهَا مِن مَال. Whatever wealth you find, take it, it's yours. Whatever women you find, take them as your concubines. Whatever weapons you find, take it and confiscate it. Whatever food you find in the houses, eat it, enjoy. You have a free-for-all in Medina for 3 days. Yazid, he sends a letter to Muslim ibn Uqba. He says, فَإِنَّهُ, about Imam Al-Sajjad, he says, fight everybody but leave Ali ibn al-Husayn alone. Do not attack Ali ibn al-Husayn. He says, فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يَدْخُلْ فِي شَيْءٍ مِّمَّا دَخَلُوا فِيهِ. Because Ali ibn al-Husayn has nothing to do with this revolution. وَقَدْ أَتَانِي كِتَابُهُ. We don't have the letter that Imam Al-Sajjad wrote. But Yazid, he says that Imam Al-Sajjad, Ali ibn al-Husayn, has nothing to do with this rebellion. Leave him alone. I received his letter. Now, Ibn Kathir, he writes, إِنَّهُ حَبَلَتْ أَلْفُ امْرَأَةٍ فِي تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامِ مِنْ غَيْرِ زَوْجٍ. There was blood flowing in the streets of Medina. The army of Muslim ibn Uqba, they stationed their horses in the masjid of Rasulullah. The mosque of the Prophet became a stable for the horses. Ibn Kathir says 1,000 virgins were impregnated by this army. You have 1,000 newborns who were born out of rape. Now, in this atmosphere, you may say, why didn't Imam Al-Sajjad rise up? Why didn't he do anything? Because the Imam alayhi salam knows that we don't have the manpower to resist. If we fight, what's going to happen? I will be killed, all of my followers will be killed, and there will be no trace of Islam left. This is very similar, by the way, to what happened in Iraq. There were many Shias for many years criticizing Sayyid al-Sistani, why doesn't he come out and say anything? Criticizing Sayyid al-Khou'i, why doesn't he come out and say anything? Many of them were following the example of Imam Al-Sajjad, keeping their heads low, working quietly for the sake of preservation. I promise you, brothers and sisters, that sometimes our ulama, they're silent not because they're afraid. They're silent because they care about the blood of the Shia. They don't want this blood to be spilled in vain. This is what Imam Al-Sajjad was trying to teach the people. That I don't have a problem with revolting, but our blood, if it's going to be shed, it should be for a good cause. It should matter. We shouldn't just give our blood freely. We have to be strategic. We have to plan. We can't be reckless. If Sayyid al-Khou'i came out and challenged Saddam, you know what would have happened? Millions of Shias would have been wiped out. In fact, it's very possible that the Hawza of Najaf would have been completely destroyed. Sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to do what people expect you not to do. It takes courage to say, I'm going to stay silent even though I know people are going to call me a coward. But it's actually a sign of strength. That I am going to preserve the blood of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. I'm going to preserve this madhab. We're going to weather the storm and we're going to build quietly. We're going to keep our heads down. And that's how Imam Al-Sajjad went from 3 to 5 followers after Karbala to 173 scholars of the highest eminence at the time of his death. This was the first uprising. Waq'atul Harrah. Imam Al-Sajjad excluded. This was just an anti-Umayyad movement. It was not a Shi'i uprising. The second uprising that took place, Thawratul Tawwabin, in the year 65 after the Hijrah. You know, the 18,000 letters that Imam Al-Husayn alayhi salam received in Kufa, these individuals were still there. Many of them were still in Kufa. Sulaiman ibn Surad was among the leaders of Kufa. He was Shia, maybe politically Shia, perhaps maybe theologically to an extent. Many of the Shias in Kufa, they felt guilty for not trying harder to help Imam al-Hussein. Many of them felt that we failed our Imam. Habib ibn Mudahar al-Asadi, he was with us, but he got himself to Karbala. He made it. He found a way to get to Imam al-Hussein, but we failed our Imam. And they felt that it's not enough for us to just do tawbah with our tongues. We need to demonstrate our remorse. We need to demonstrate our repentance by sacrificing our blood, by fighting against the Umayyads with the intention of what? Overthrowing the Umayyads and handing over Khilafah to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Again, when you look at the historical accounts, there is no sign that Imam Al-Sajjad supported this movement. The Imam alayhi salam, there's no connection between him and Thawratul Tawwabin. He distanced himself. And what you find is, my dear brothers and sisters, is that, again, this is more of a Shia movement. But the problem is, the movement is too late. Sometimes opportunities present themselves to you and you delay. These people are willing to die, but you should have been willing to die 4 years ago. You waited. You know, when we speak about the striking of Ali on the day of Khandaq, you know why that strike was so valuable? Because of the timing. It's important to do good, but it's even more important to do good at the right time. For example, today, what we see in the world, in our communities, the proliferation of LGBTQ ideology and gender ideology. It's good that we're pushing back as a community, but I think we're late. I think we're 20 years late. It would have been more affected if we inoculated our community 20 years ago with these conversations, but we waited too long. And now we're having to do damage control. We're reactive. Thawratul Tawwabin is a story about men who are good, who are decent-hearted, but they did not act when the time required them to act. They delayed. That ship has sailed. Imam Al-Sajjad said, "That's not the time. Your revolution is not going to go anywhere. You're going to die and nothing's going to come out of it." And then you have the uprising of Mukhtar ibn Ubaydillah al-Thaqafi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Mukhtar ibn Ubaydillah al-Thaqafi is a unique individual. Of course, when you look at Mukhtar, we have to be honest and say that we have narrations that praise Mukhtar ibn Ubaydillah al-Thaqafi, and we also have narrations that condemn him. So you have ikhtilaf among our scholars regarding Mukhtar. There are some scholars that say that, some scholars like Allam al-Majlisi, he has reservations about Mukhtar. Some of our ulama, they say that yes, he deserves credit for avenging and seeking revenge against the killers of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, but he engaged in some un-Islamic practices like mutilating bodies. Some ulama say that this was something that was disapproved and unacceptable. You have other scholars like Sayyid al-Khou'i. Sayyid al-Khou'i says, we recognize Mukhtar ibn Ubaydillah al-Thaqafi as a great personality, and all of the ahadith that condemn him have weak chains of transmission. In any case, what you find is that in the 66th year after the Hijrah, again, look at how careful Imam Al-Sajjad is. Imam Al-Sajjad is very careful not to make direct contact with Mukhtar. Why? Because if Mukhtar and Imam Al-Sajjad are seen together, if they come together, there will be a target on both of their backs. It's not a matter of courage. It's a matter of doing what is in the best interest of the movement. You might have two scholars who respect each other, but maybe they never want to be seen with each other because of certain considerations. Some of us are very superficial. We think that this scholar has beef with that scholar because we never see them together. Maybe they're aligned, but they understand that there are negative implications if they outwardly show support to one another. Imam Al-Sajjad, he distanced himself from Mukhtar, not because he was necessarily against Mukhtar, but because he understood that for the safety of Mukhtar and for the safety of the Imam himself, there needs to be some distance. Imam Zainul Abidin, what does he do? Again, look at the strategy, look at the planning of Ahlul Bayt. Some scholars say that Imam Al-Sajjad was directing and giving instructions to Mukhtar through Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah was meeting with Mukhtar. And Imam Zainul Abidin was using him as a proxy. And what's amazing is the Umayyads were never able to draw a line from Imam Zainul Abidin to Mukhtar. Because the Imam was smart. He was wise. Covered his tracks. Working underground. Working quietly. I'll tell you this, my dear brothers and sisters. You don't always need to be in the limelight to be a game changer. This is very important. You don't need to be in the limelight to be a game changer. And that's why Islam, for example, places great importance on the role of a mother, on the role of our women. Islam teaches that our women, our mothers, our wives, our sisters, they can do so much. They are the ones who shape human society, and they don't even need to be out in public when they do it. You can be a game changer behind the scenes. And this is what we see with Imam Al-Sajjad. Working quietly, laying low, keeping your head down, thinking about the future. You might not see the fruits of your labor today, but that should not discourage you. Imam Zainul Abidin, he was doing things in his life to benefit the Shi'as for generations to come. The question is, are we applying this teaching of Imam Al-Sajjad? What are we doing today that will benefit the Shi'as in 10, 20, 50, 100 years? We have to be forward thinking. We should not just be thinking about what are we going to do next Thursday for Dua Kumail. What's our 5-year plan? What's our 10-year plan? What's our 50-year plan? This was Imam Al-Sajjad. This is Ahlul Bayt. And Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam, as I mentioned to you, my dear brothers and sisters, he was able to strike this balance between keeping the memory of Imam al-Hussein alive and at the same time giving hope to the Shi'as that this caravan must go on. We have to keep going forward. We have to continue. Imam Al-Sajjad, whenever there was an opportunity to bring up the memory of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he took advantage of it. And he did it very wisely. Because from the Umayyads' perspective, he's just mourning his father. So it never attracted any unwanted attention from the Umayyads. This is a son who's simply mourning his father. That's what they thought. But Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, he had a vision for the community. He knew that keeping the memory of Hussein alive is to keep the memory of Rasulullah alive. And that's why when they would bring a cup of water to Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, the narrations say, for 34 years, not a day went by unless Imam Zainul Abidin would shed tears for Imam al-Hussein. When they would bring water to him, the teardrops of Imam al-Sajjad would drip into the water. One day he was sitting with Abu Hamza al-Thumali. Abu Hamza, he's looking at Imam al-Sajjad and he sees that the Imam is choked up. he could see the tears streaming. Abu Hamza, he says, Ya ibn Rasulillah, ila mata al-buka? Oh Imam, how long are you going to continue crying? It's been many years. And he says to Imam Al-Sajjad, Ya ibn Rasulillah, al-qatlu lakum aada wa karamatukum min Allah al-shahada. Ya ibn Rasulillah, to be killed is a norm in your family. It's not something that is new. Your father was killed, your uncle was killed, your grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen was martyred, your grandmother Fatima al-Zahra was martyred. To be killed is common in your family. And your honor from Allah is martyrdom. وَكَرَامَتُكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ الشَّهَادَةِ. The Imam alayhi salam, he looked up at Aba Hamza al-Thumali and he says, Na'am, Ya Aba Hamza, shakarallahu sa'yak. Al-qatlu lana aada. I agree with you. What you said is true. To be killed is common in our family. وَكَرَامَتُنَا مِنَ اللَّهِ الشَّهَادَةِ. And it's Allah's honor upon us that He grants us martyrdom. But I ask you, O Abu Hamza, أسألك بالله يا أبا حمزة, هل سبي النساء لنا عادة? Is it also common that our women are taken as captives? Is it common that Zainab, the daughter of Ali, is in shackles and chains? Is that also common? The way that the women and children were tortured is something that we cannot even imagine, my dear brothers and sisters. Whenever Imam Al-Sajjad had an opportunity to remind the people of the plight of the family of the Prophet, he did. On another occasion, he goes to the marketplace in Medina. Everyone sees the Imam. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Imam is walking by the one who sells vegetables and fruits, the one who has other merchandise, silk and cloth and fabrics, until he passes by a butcher. You know where I'm going with this. Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, he sees a butcher and he sees that this butcher has some sheep. Imam Al-Sajjad says, he sees a butcher about to slaughter a sheep. Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, he says to the butcher, هل سقيتها ماءً? Did you give this animal, did you give it water before sacrificing it? The butcher says to Imam Al-Sajjad, I want you to listen to the answer of the butcher. He says, Ya ibn Rasulillah, your grandfather Rasulullah taught us to show compassion to animals. Ya ibn Rasulullah, of course I gave water to this sheep, to this animal. Rasulullah taught us to have rahmah upon the animals, to not kill an animal when it's thirsty, to reduce its pain, to sharpen the blade. At that moment, Allahu Akbar, at that moment, Imam Al-Sajjad alayhi salam, he turns his face to Karbala. What does he say? He starts to address his father, Aba Abdullah. قال أبا يا أبا السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله أبا يا أبا الكبش لا يذبح حتى يسقى ماء وأنت ذبحوك عطشانا غريبا. Aba Abdullah, my father, my beloved father, look, even the sheep is given water before it is slaughtered. And you, Ya Aba Abdullah, you were slaughtered while you were thirsty. Aba Abdullah, you were slaughtered while there were animals drinking from the Furat. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal, with these tears in our eyes, these tears that we shed out of our love for Ahlul Bayt, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us our sins, to pardon us our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of our brothers and sisters all around the world. If there's anyone who is ill among us, we ask you, O Allah, for the sake of the one who is ill in Karbala, to cure them of their ailment, to grant them a speedy recovery. We ask you, O Allah subhanahu wa Allah, to grant us the ziyarah of Imam Al-Sajjad, the mazloom Imam of Ahlul Bayt, who's buried in Baqi', who doesn't have a shrine over his grave. We ask you, O Allah, to make us among the generation who is able to restore the shrines of Jannatul Baqi'. We ask you, O Allah, most importantly, to raise us on the Day of Judgment in the company of Ali ibn al-Husayn, to make us of those who are worthy of his intercession. يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.